Before we dive into this chilling tale, make sure to hit like and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories. You won't want to miss the true, dark accounts I'm about to share. So sit tight and let's begin. It was October 21st, 2023. The city of Farrington was cold, the kind of cold that settled deep in your bones, even during the late afternoon. The wind sliced through the streets, and the usual bustle of the city seemed quieter than ever. For me, it was just another day until I walked into St. Elmore's Hospital. Now, I'm not the type to believe in the ghost stories people like to share. Most of them are just tales told to keep the thrill alive, nothing more. But that evening, something felt different. I had just graduated as a nurse and was excited to start my first job at a hospital. The offer from St. Elmore's came out of nowhere, but they were offering a decent paycheck, and who could say no to that? I was eager to prove myself, to show I could handle whatever came my way. But as soon as I walked through those hospital doors, I felt wrong. There was something off about the place. The walls looked like they'd seen better days, and the air was thick, like it had been trapped here for years. It wasn't just the usual smell of sterile cleaning products. It was like the building had its own scent, one that I couldn't shake. It followed me everywhere. I remember the receptionist, a pale woman who didn't smile when she greeted me. She didn't even say much, just handed me a set of keys to the special ward, the section I'd be working in. "You'll be fine," she said, but her eyes, those eyes, they told me something different. As I made my way to the ward, the lights flickered overhead, casting strange shadows against the walls. The hallways seemed to stretch forever, twisting in ways that didn't make sense. I had to stop twice to check the numbers on the doors, just to make sure I hadn't gotten lost. Finally, I found it, the special ward. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open. The smell hit me first, thick and stale, like the kind of air that hasn't moved in years. But it wasn't just the smell. It was the silence, no sound. Not even the soft hum of machines. Just nothing. The ward felt frozen in time, like it had been abandoned long ago, but somehow still had life. I walked in, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the cold tile floor. The patients were there, sitting in their beds. But they didn't look at me. No one said hello or even acknowledged my presence. Their eyes were blank, staring at nothing. There was Mr. Reynolds, the oldest of them all. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, looking out the window, but his eyes were empty, as though the light had left them long ago. He didn't even seem to notice when I introduced myself. I glanced at Emily, a young girl who was rocking back and forth in her bed. Her lips were moving, but it was hard to catch what she was saying. I leaned closer, straining to hear. "The doctor never left," she whispered over and over. I tried to push the feeling away. It was probably just the stress of starting a new job, right? As I moved down the hall, trying to get to know the layout of the ward, I bumped into Frank. He was sitting in a chair, staring at the floor. His eyes were wide, filled with fear. "You hear them?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The screams from the basement. I smiled awkwardly, trying to laugh it off. "It's probably just the pipes or something." I didn't want to seem paranoid, but as I walked back down the hall to my station, I couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease in my chest. The silence, the strange whispers, the feeling that something was waiting. And that was just the beginning. The next few days were a blur of routine. I worked long hours, attending to the patients in the special ward, but the unease never fully left me. The whispers continued, faint at first, like a breeze barely brushing your skin. But the longer I stayed, the louder they became. At night, the hospital seemed to come alive in ways I couldn't explain. The lights flickered, shadows shifted, and every hallway felt like it stretched on forever. One evening, after the last of the patients had been settled for the night, I decided to take a walk through the hospital. The night shift staff was quiet. moving like shadows in the dim lighting. I passed by the nurse's station, where Helen, the head nurse, was sitting at her desk. She didn't look up when I walked by. Her eyes were glued to the paperwork in front of her. But something about her made me pause. I hadn't spoken to Helen much, but when I did, she always seemed distant. She wasn't rude, just cold. Tonight, though, she was different. There was a tension in her posture, like she was waiting for something to happen. As I walked past, I noticed a flicker of something in her eyes, something I couldn't quite place. Fear. I stopped just long enough to ask, "Everything okay?" She didn't immediately respond. When she did, her voice was low, almost as if she didn't want anyone else to hear. "You'll get used to it," she said, almost too quickly. "The hospital ... it has its ways. Just don't listen to the rumors, all right? Focus on your work. Stay in your lane." I tried to ignore the chill that crept up my spine. "Yeah, sure," I said, trying to smile. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. The days passed, but the feeling of being watched never left. The patient's behavior only got stranger. Emily stopped talking altogether. She just stared at me with those wide, hollow eyes, her lips slightly parted like she wanted to say something but couldn't. Then, one night, I found Mr. Reynolds standing by the window, staring at the night sky. He didn't move when I entered the room, but something in the way his body was positioned made me stop. There was a subtle shift in the air, a heaviness I couldn't explain. His mouth was moving, but no sound came out as I stepped closer. His eyes turned to meet mine. "You're not supposed to be here," he whispered hoarsely, his voice breaking. "They're coming. They've been waiting." I backed away, confused. The words made no sense, but they also felt strangely ... urgent. It was as if he knew something I didn't, something I wasn't supposed to know ... Later that night, as I sat in the break room trying to shake off the feeling of dread, I overheard a conversation between two of the doctors. I didn't mean to listen in, but their words caught my attention. "We need to keep an eye on Blake," one of them said. "If she starts asking questions about the ward, we'll have to stop her. She can't know." The other doctor's voice was lower, almost a whisper. "I know, but she'll find out sooner or later. The patients are getting restless. We can't keep them quiet much longer." The conversation stopped as I walked by, and I tried to shake it off, but my heart was pounding in my chest. What were they hiding? What was so important about me? And then, for the first time, I thought about the rumors Helen had dismissed so easily. The hospital had secrets, dark ones, and they weren't just about the patients. They were about everyone who worked here. That night, as I made my way back to the ward, I noticed something strange. The hallways, which had always felt empty and quiet, seemed fuller now. Not with people, but with ... something else. There was an odd weight in the air, like the building itself was holding its breath. I tried to push the feeling away, telling myself it was just my nerves. But as I reached the end of the hall, I saw him again, the figure, a shadow darting just out of the corner of my eye. It was quick, but I saw it clearly this time. It was a man, tall and thin, with long dark hair that hung down over his face. He was standing at the end of the hallway watching me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. And then he was gone. I didn't know what to think, but I was sure of one thing. I wasn't alone. The next few days became a blur of unease, each hour longer than the last. I could feel something in the air, something I couldn't quite touch but could sense all around me. It was suffocating. The patients were acting stranger than usual, more withdrawn, more ... lost, and the whispers, they never stopped. By the end of the week, I decided I couldn't just ignore it any longer. I had to know what was going on. I had to find out why I felt like I was walking in someone else's nightmare. So I went back to the special ward, my footsteps echoing louder than ever in the silence. The lights flickered above me, casting shadows that seemed to stretch out of the corners of the walls. bending and twisting in ways that didn't make sense. I had to find answers out. As I walked past Mr. Reynolds' room, I noticed something strange. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see him inside, standing at the window again. But this time, something was different. His back was facing me, and his body was stiff, unnaturally so. I pushed the door open a little further, my heart racing. "Mr. Reynolds?" I called softly. No answer. I stepped inside, my eyes on his still form. His hands were clenched tightly around the window frame, and his body trembled. I reached out, my fingers brushing his shoulder. "Mr. Reynolds, are you all right?" I asked. Again, my voice barely above a whisper. And then he turned. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes locked onto mine, filled with an expression of sheer panic. His lips moved, but I couldn't make out the words. And then, as quickly as it had started, he collapsed onto the floor, his body limp. I backed away, my heart thumping painfully in my chest. This wasn't normal. Something was wrong, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. I ran down the hallway to the nurse's station, my hands shaking. Helen was sitting there, as usual, flipping through a file. She looked up at me, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Reynolds." "He collapsed," I said, struggling to find my voice. "I don't know what happened. Something's not right." Helen didn't flinch. She didn't even seem surprised. "You'll get used to it," she said, her voice cold. "It's part of the hospital. Things happen here, strange things." "Strange things?" I repeated, confused. "What do you mean?" Helen's gaze turned colder, sharper. She set the file down slowly, her hands tense. "There are things you don't understand. This hospital, this ward, it's not like other places. You need to stay away from it. It's not safe." Her words sent a chill down my spine, but I refused to back down. "What do you mean? What's really going on here?" Helen looked at me, her face hardening. "You'll see soon enough. But trust me, Blake, you don't want to know the truth." That night I couldn't sleep. The hospital was too quiet, too still, but the weight of what Helen had said kept echoing in my mind. Stay away from the ward, I tried to convince myself. It was just the stress of being new, the pressure of the job. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't ignore the strange things happening around me. Something was pulling me toward the ward. Something I couldn't resist. So, in the dead of night, I found myself back in the special ward. The lights flickered above me, casting erratic shadows. I moved quickly, trying not to make a sound. But then, as I passed by the last door in the hallway, something caught my eye. The door to the basement. I had seen it a few times before, but never thought much of it. The basement was locked most of the time. No one ever spoke about it. But tonight, the door was cracked open. I felt the pull. Without thinking, I stepped forward, pushing the door open just enough to slip inside. The basement was darker than I expected, the air thick and damp. I could barely see anything, but the smell. It was worse than the rest of the hospital combined. It was suffocating. I took a few steps into the darkness, my heart pounding. I couldn't explain why, but I knew I had to keep moving, and that's when I heard it. A faint sound coming from the far end of the basement. The sound of someone or something moving. I froze, the blood draining from my face. But before I could turn around and leave, a voice came from the shadows. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice was low, almost a whisper, yet it felt like it was echoing through the very bones of the hospital. I stood frozen in place, my heart racing, the weight of the air thick with dread. I couldn't see anyone in the darkness, but the sound of shifting, of someone or something moving closer, sent a cold shiver down my spine. I slowly took a step back, my mind screaming at me to leave, but my feet wouldn't move. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the distant hum of the hospital's lights above. My breath felt shallow, as if the very air was being sucked from the room. Then, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a man, tall and thin, his hair long and matted. He was wearing a hospital gown, like the patients on the ward, but there was something wrong about him, something unnatural. His eyes were hollow, sunken deep into his face, and his skin was a pale shade of gray, almost lifeless. I couldn't speak. My throat had gone dry. The man stood before me, not moving, just watching. His eyes were vacant, yet there was a presence, a force that made my legs tremble. "You're not supposed to be here," the man said again, his voice a rasping whisper. "You don't belong here." I finally found my voice, though it was barely more than a breath. "Who are you? What is this place?" The man's lips curled into a faint, twisted smile, but it wasn't one of comfort. It was something darker, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "You'll understand soon enough," he whispered. "You'll understand everything. This place is a prison for the living and the dead. It's where they all come ... to wait." I could barely process his words, my brain struggling to make sense of what I was hearing. My instincts screamed at me to run, to get as far away from this man, this ... place ... as possible. But I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, trapped by the sheer terror of the moment. "Who ... who are they?" I managed to ask, my voice shaking. He stepped closer, his eyes locked onto mine, his breath cold against my skin. "The ones who wait. The ones who never leave," he whispered, his voice growing lower, more chilling. "They're always here. Always." Before I could say anything else, I heard the faint sound of footsteps, rapid, frantic steps coming down the basement stairs. The man's face flickered with a fleeting look of recognition. Then his eyes shifted back to me. "Leave," he hissed, his voice now laced with urgency. "They're coming." Without thinking, I turned and bolted for the door, my legs propelling me forward, but every step felt heavier than the last. The basement seemed to stretch endlessly before me, the darkness swallowing everything behind me. I could hear the sound of those footsteps, too many of them, too fast, closing in behind me. I reached the door, my fingers fumbling for the handle, but just as I pulled it open, a cold hand gripped my arm. The pain was sharp, searing, as if the very touch of that hand burned through my flesh. I turned, gasping for air, only to see the man again, his face now twisted in agony, his eyes black as coal, filled with something I could not comprehend. "You can't leave," he whispered, his voice no longer a whisper, but a scream that echoed in my mind. "None of us can." In that moment, the weight of his words hit me like a thunderclap. The hospital ... the ward ... It wasn't just a building. It was a place where souls were trapped, where the living and the dead were caught in some endless cycle. A place where the lines between life and death blurred beyond recognition. With every ounce of strength I had left, I wrenched myself free from his grip and slammed the door shut behind me. The noise of it echoed down the hallway, but as I stumbled away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I didn't go back to the ward that night. I couldn't. I barely slept, tossing and turning in my room, trying to push the images from my mind, but they wouldn't leave. The figure, the man, the voices. The next morning, I went straight to Helen. I had to know more. She was standing by the nurse's station when I approached, looking as calm and detached as ever. But when I spoke to her, there was something different in her eyes, something almost knowing. "I saw him," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The man in the basement," he said. He said this place isn't normal, that we're all trapped here. Helen's eyes flickered, but only for a second. Then she sighed, looking more tired than usual. "I told you," she said, her voice soft, but firm. "You need to stop asking questions. You don't want to know. This place, it's not what you think it is. No one gets out, Blake. No one." I didn't know what to do with that. My mind was spinning, trying to piece together everything I had seen, everything I had felt. I couldn't just ignore it. There had to be a way out. There had to be a way to survive. And yet, the more I looked for answers, the more I realized I wasn't just trying to find the truth. I was trying to escape. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even when I wasn't in the special ward. Every corner I turned, every hallway I passed, it felt like invisible eyes were tracking my every move. The hospital, which had once seemed so sterile and controlled, now felt like a labyrinth of secrets, dark corridors stretching out into places I couldn't understand. Every step seemed to take me closer to something I wasn't ready to face. That afternoon, as I sat in the break room, I overheard a conversation between two nurses. I hadn't meant to listen in, but their words cut through the silence, and I couldn't ignore them. "She was in the ward last night," one of them said, her voice a hushed whisper. "I saw her go in after hours. Are you sure?" The other nurse replied, her tone skeptical. "She's been gone for years. No one knows what happened to her." The first nurse's voice dropped lower. "I saw her, I swear. She looked different, changed. She had the same hollow eyes, same look they get, like they're already dead." I felt a chill run through me. Who were they talking about? And why did the words "already dead" feel like they belonged to me? Before I could hear more, the conversation ended abruptly. They both turned and left, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The mention of hollow eyes had struck me the hardest. It was the same look I'd seen in Mr. Reynolds' eyes, in the man in the basement, and in Helen's eyes just the other day. I had to know more. I immediately went to the ward. The hospital had become my obsession, the need to understand what was going on gnawing at my mind every second. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to find the answers. I had to know what was happening to these people, what had happened to them. As I walked down the hallway toward the special ward, I felt a sense of foreboding creeping over me. The lights flickered, casting an eerie glow over the worn-out walls. The silence was suffocating. The air was thick with tension. I reached the door to Mr. Reynolds' room, my hand trembling as I placed it on the handle. The room was dark, the blinds pulled shut, blocking out the light. I opened the door slowly, trying not to make a sound. But the creaking hinges seemed too loud, too deliberate. When I stepped inside, I froze. Mr. Reynolds was sitting by the window again, his back to me, just like the first time. But this time, his movements were different, jerky, uneven. He seemed to be struggling, as if something was pulling at him, something invisible, yet undeniable. "Mr. Reynolds?" I asked softly, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer. His body twitched, then froze again. He turned, his face pale and drawn, his eyes wide and empty, yet filled with a strange intensity. "Blake," he said, his voice strained, barely audible. I stepped closer, heart pounding. "What's going on? What's happening to you?" His lips trembled, and for a moment, I thought he might speak again. But instead, his head tilted unnaturally to one side, and a slow, guttural sound escaped from deep within his chest, like the rasping of an animal, desperate and pained. I backed away in horror, but I couldn't tear my eyes from him. "Blake." "It's coming," Mr. Reynolds whispered, his voice now a rasp. "It's too late. You're already here, ... The words felt like a death sentence. I could hear the faint rustling of something behind me, the softest scrape of shoes on the floor. I turned, half expecting someone to be standing in the doorway, but no one was there. "Mr. Reynolds," I whispered, but his eyes were no longer on me. His head lolled to one side, and his hands gripped the chair as if he were holding onto his last shred of life. And then, in the silence of that room, I heard it. A sound so faint at first, I wasn't sure if I was hearing it at all. But then it came again. A soft whisper, almost like a voice calling my name. "Blake." I turned, my breath catching in my throat. The man from the basement. He was standing in the doorway now, his figure looming like a shadow, his hollow eyes staring into mine. "You should have left," he said in a low, broken voice. "Now you've seen too much." I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But something held me there, as if my feet were glued to the floor. The man stepped forward, and this time I couldn't move fast enough to escape. His fingers, cold and clammy, reached out and brushed against my arm. The touch sent a shock through my body, freezing me in place. I couldn't breathe. "Stay," he whispered, his voice now sounding far away. "Stay with us." The room began to spin, the walls closing in. The air was thick, suffocating, as if I were drowning in it. My vision blurred, and before I knew what was happening, I was on my knees, my body unable to resist. It felt as though my very essence was being pulled away from me, as if I were fading into the darkness. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. "Stay with us." And then everything went black. I don't know how long I was out. When I woke, I was no longer in Mr. Reynolds' room. The hospital had disappeared, replaced by a darkness that felt cold and suffocating. It was as though I had been transported to another world, one that existed somewhere between reality and nightmare. I couldn't feel my body, couldn't move, but my mind was alert, more awake than ever before, and I was not alone. There were figures in the shadow shapes that barely resembled human beings, their outlines jagged and distorted. They seemed to be circling, whispering, their voices an incoherent hum that rattled the very core of my soul. I couldn't understand them, but I could feel their intent. Hunger, despair, rage. One of them stepped closer, its face a grotesque blur of features, barely recognizable. It reached out a long bony hand and touched my shoulder. The coldness of its touch seeped into my skin, sending a jolt of fear straight to my heart. I tried to move, tried to scream, but nothing happened. I was paralyzed, unable to do anything. But witness what was unfolding around me. The figure that had touched me tilted its head, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light, as though it were looking directly into the very depths of my soul. I could feel the darkness inside of me, tugging at the edges of my mind, as if it were trying to pull me into it. "You shouldn't have stayed," it whispered, its voice like nails scraping against metal. "You've seen too much, Blake. Now you belong to us." The words cut through the silence, reverberating in my ears long after they had been spoken. And then, as if on cue, the figures around me began to shift, to move. They surrounded me, their faces more defined now, more human, but twisted, diseased, like they were no longer living, yet not quite dead. I could hear their breathing slow, ragged, and faintly echoing, as if their lungs no longer functioned properly. Their eyes stared at me with that same emptiness, the same hollowness I'd seen in Mr. Reynolds' eyes, in Hullen's, and in the man from the basement. I didn't know what they were, but I could feel it. They weren't just patients. They were trapped in this place, this cursed hospital, by something far darker than I could comprehend. "You should have left," the figure repeated, its voice now a chorus, echoing from every direction. "But now it's too late." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The darkness around me seemed to grow thicker, pressing in on all sides, until it felt like it was suffocating me. I could barely breathe, barely think as the figures closed in, their hands reaching toward me with fingers that seemed to stretch longer, like claws. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it any longer, something happened. A shift. A sudden jarring change in the air. I wasn't sure what it was at first, maybe a flicker of light in the distance, or the faintest sound of a door creaking open. But it was enough to pull my mind back from the edge, enough to make me realize that I wasn't completely alone. There was someone else, someone alive. I could feel their presence, a warmth, a rush of energy. And then, just as suddenly as the figures had appeared, they stopped. They stepped back, their gazes shifting. Toward the entrance. Something or someone was coming. I couldn't move, but I could see it now. The shadow at the doorway. It wasn't one of them. It was something else. Someone different. The figures parted, making way for whoever or whatever was approaching. I held my breath, heart hammering in my chest. A figure emerged from the darkness. It was a man, his silhouette tall and thin, like the one I had seen in the basement. But this one was different. His eyes, they were not empty. They were full of life, full of purpose. And then he spoke. "Blake, you're not supposed to be here." His voice rang out, calm and steady, cutting through the tension. "But I'm here to help." My heart skipped a beat. Could it be? Was he one of the few who had escaped? Or was he just another trick of the darkness? He stepped closer, his movements deliberate, as if he had been here before, knew exactly what was happening. "You need to listen to me," he said, his voice low but urgent. "This place isn't what you think. It's not just a hospital. It's a prison for souls, for the lost, and it's hungry." I blinked, trying to process his words. I wanted to run, to escape, but I still couldn't move. The figures were still watching me, waiting. The man continued. "You've seen the truth now, but there's still a chance for you to get out. But you have to act fast." My mind raced. I wanted to ask him what he meant, how he could help me. But before I could say anything, the figures shifted again, closing in, their eyes glowing with an eerie light. The man raised his hand, and a strange shimmering light flared from his palm. The figures recoiled, hissing, like they were afraid of it. "You have to survive, Blake," the man said, his voice unwavering. "You have to find a way out, before they claim you." And with that, he turned and walked toward the darkness, disappearing into it. But I wasn't alone anymore. I had a choice. I had a chance. And this time, I was determined to escape, no matter the cost. I didn't know what to make of the man's warning. Every part of me screamed to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But I couldn't. Something was keeping me here, something stronger than fear. The darkness that had enveloped. The hospital wasn't just an external force. It was inside me now, gnawing at my mind, urging me to find the truth. I took a deep breath, steadying myself as the cold air cut through the silence. The figures had faded back into the shadows, but their eyes still burned into me, watching my every move. It was as if they were waiting for me to make a mistake, to falter, so they could pounce. But I couldn't let that happen. Not now. Not when I was so close to uncovering the truth. I slowly moved toward the direction the man had disappeared into, my footsteps hesitant but determined. Every instinct told me to turn back, to give up, but I couldn't. Not after everything I had seen. Not after hearing those whispers. The hospital felt alive now, as if the walls themselves were breathing, shifting, reacting to my presence. Faintest sounds like the rustling of paper or the distant creak of a door echoed in the air, amplifying the tension. As I walked deeper into the darkness, I noticed a door at the far end of the hallway. It was old and weathered, the paint chipped, and the wood warped with age. But there was something about it that called to me. A sense of familiarity, even though I had never seen it before. Without thinking, I reached for the handle, my fingers trembling. The door creaked open, the sound sharp in the stillness. Inside, I found a room I had never noticed before, hidden away from the rest of the hospital, as if it didn't belong here at all. The air inside was thick with dust, and the light from the flickering bulb above did little to illuminate the room. On the far wall, there was a large mirror, its surface cracked and streaked with grime. I couldn't take my eyes off it. There was something wrong about the reflection, something off, something alive. I stepped closer, drawn to it like a moth to a flame. My heart pounded in my chest, every instinct screaming at me to turn away. But I couldn't. The mirror seemed to pull me in, its surface rippling like water. distorting my reflection. And then, I saw her dot at first. It was just a shadow of figure standing behind me in the mirror. But as I stared, the shadow began to take shape, becoming clearer. A woman, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow and dark. She was watching me, her lips moving in silent words, though I couldn't hear them. I reached out, my hand trembling, but just before my fingers touched the glass, the reflection of the woman in the mirror grinned. It was a twisted, cruel smile, one that didn't belong to her, but to something far darker. The reflection of the woman raised her hand, and I felt a cold chill run down my spine. She reached out, not through the glass, but from within my own mind. Her fingers brushed against my thoughts, sending a wave of nausea through me. "Don't look," a voice whispered in my ear, pulling me from the trance-like state I had fallen into. I turned around, my heart racing, and found the man from before standing behind me. His eyes were wide with urgency, his expression grave. "They're trying to take you," he said, his voice low and steady. "The mirror, everything here, it's all connected. They're using it to drag you in, to trap you in their world." I took a step back, my body trembling with fear. What is this place? What's happening to me? The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned, his eyes scanning the room as if he was looking for something. "You're not just a patient here. You're part of their cycle, part of their trap." I didn't understand. "What do you mean? Who are they?" His eyes darkened. "The souls that are trapped in this place. They're not just lost. They single quotes feeding. Using this hospital as a prison, they pull in others. Like you. They feed on your fear, on your confusion, until there's nothing left." "But how do I get out?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. He looked at me, his expression somber. "That's what you have to find. The door, the way out." And just as quickly as he had appeared, he turned, disappearing into the shadows again. I stood alone, staring at the mirror once more. This time, the woman's face was gone, replaced with the reflection of my own. But something was wrong. My own eyes, were hollow, empty. The same look I had seen in Mr. Reynolds, in the man from the basement. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't let myself become part of this cycle. But the door, the way out, it wasn't clear. I had to find it. I had to survive. The cold, suffocating air seemed to grow thicker around me, pressing in from all sides. And I realized then, as the darkness closed in, that there was no way out of this place without confronting what it wanted. Confronting the truth of what it had been hiding. I had to face the darkness. And only then would I escape. I couldn't let the mirror control me. I knew that now, but the air in the room was thick with an almost tangible pressure. My breath came out in shallow gasps, every instinct telling me to run, to leave, to get as far away from the mirror as possible, but my legs wouldn't move. It was like the room itself had wrapped its invisible tendrils around me, holding me in place, keeping me captive. The dark, oppressive energy in the air was growing stronger, as if the hospital itself was alive, watching me. I had to break free from its grip. I looked around frantically. The man had said I needed to find the door, the way out, but the shadows were closing in. I could feel them, crawling along the walls, slithering toward me. The whispers were louder. Now their voices echoing off the walls, growing more desperate. I turned away from the mirror, my heart pounding. The darkness wasn't just a presence in the room anymore. It was a force that wanted to drag me into its depths. I started to move, slowly at first, hesitant, like I was walking through thick mud. The hallway outside the room was quiet. Too quiet. There were no more echoes of footsteps, no distant sounds of machines or beeping monitors. Just silence. Dead silence. It was like the whole world had frozen, leaving me to face whatever was coming next. And then, I saw a dot at the far end of the hallway. A figure was standing. It was tall, its shape obscured by the dim light, but I could feel it. It was watching me. It was waiting. I froze. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there, its presence suffocating. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible, but it didn't answer. Instead, it took one slow step forward, then another. My heart skipped a beat as the figure drew closer, the air around it growing colder with every step. The hallway seemed to stretch, becoming longer, as though the distance between us was being manipulated, distorted. Then a voice, a familiar voice. "You shouldn't have come here, Blake. You were never supposed to know." I spun around, searching for the source, but there was no one. The hallway behind me was empty. But the voice, it was inside my head, echoing like a warning. The figure reached the doorway, its face finally coming into view. It wasn't human, at least not in any way I understood. Its skin was pale and stretched too tight, its eyes dark, pits of emptiness, and its mouth, it didn't look right. It was stretched wide, too wide, as if it was grinning in a way that wasn't natural. "You've seen too much," the figure said, its voice deep, guttural. "And now you'll never leave." I backed away, my feet scrambling for traction on the floor. The figure's words hung in the air, a horrible truth that I couldn't escape. But I had to try. I turned and ran, my legs pumping, the darkness chasing me. The whispers were louder now, filling my head, pulling at my sanity, trying to drag me back into the endless void. I had to get out. I had to survive. But the hospital seemed to shift, to change as I ran. The walls closed in, and the hallway stretched further, as though I was caught in a maze. The doors were locked, and the windows were boarded up, like the whole place had been designed to keep me in. I slammed into one door, then another, each one locked tight, refusing to budge. My breath came in ragged gasps. Sweat stung my eyes, and I could feel the heat of panic rising in my chest. And then, as I turned a corner, I saw someone. A figure standing at the end of the hallway, silhouetted by the dim light. But this time, it wasn't the same distorted figure. This one was different. It was Helen. Her face was pale, but she looked normal. She was standing there, watching me, her eyes wide with fear. She didn't say anything, but I could see it in her face. The same terror I had felt when I first saw her, when I first heard her whispers in the night. "Help me," she mouthed, her voice faint and broken. I stepped toward her, my hand reaching out, but she shook her head, stepping back into the darkness. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You can't save me. You have to save yourself." I froze, my heart racing. Her words echoed in my mind as she disappeared into the shadows, leaving me alone again. I turned, my eyes darting around the hallway. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening. The walls were closing in. I could feel it. The darkness was swallowing everything, and there was no way out. But then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I saw something else. A door. It was at the far end of the hallway, almost hidden by the shadows, but it was there. A faint light flickered beneath it, like a sign of hope. I ran toward it, not looking back. I didn't know what was behind that door, but it was the only way out, the only way to escape. With every step I took, the whispers grew quieter, the darkness receded, and when I reached the door, I pulled it open with all my strength. The light was blinding, but it wasn't just light. It was the feeling of fresh air, of life. I could taste freedom, just beyond the threshold. I stepped through, and the door slammed shut behind me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe again. I stood there for a moment, blinking against the harsh light, trying to gather my bearings. I expected to feel the weight of the hospital's grip lift from me, to feel safe. But there was something wrong with this place too. The walls were too white, the air too sterile, and the silence. It was deafening. I looked around. It was a hospital, all right, but not the one I'd just escaped from. This place seemed more clinical, more real. Too real that my heart raced again. Could I have somehow crossed over? Was this still part of the hospital? The idea chilled me to the bone, and I quickly shook my head. No, this couldn't be real. I walked down the hallway, feeling like a stranger in a place that was supposed to be familiar. There were no nurses, no patients, no signs of life at all. It was empty. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, the eerie quiet settling deep in my chest. The air was thick with a sense of something. Waiting, watching Dot as I continued to walk, I noticed something strange. The paintings on the walls, portraits of smiling doctors and nurses, the kind you'd find in any old hospital, were all turned upside down. It was unsettling, as if someone had been trying to hide something. But it wasn't just the oddity of the situation that bothered me. There was a pattern to it. Every painting was positioned just a little wrong, just a little off. And it wasn't just the paintings. The hallways seemed too narrow, the doors too high, and the windows, there were none. Just dark shadows that gave the impression that this place was not meant for people. I felt the panic rising again, clawing at my chest as I tried to understand what was happening. This wasn't just a normal hospital. This place was different. Worse. Then, without warning, a voice echoed from the far end of the hall. It was a low, guttural sound, one I could barely make out at first. But then, it grew clearer. Blake. The voice called Dot. It was my name, unmistakably. But there was no one there. Blake. The voice repeated, this time closer, much closer. My blood ran cold. The whisper was like a breath on my neck, but when I turned, no one was behind me. The feeling of being watched hit me like a brick, and my legs began to move on their own, walking faster, almost breaking into a run. But I couldn't outrun the sound. It followed me. It whispered in my ear, taunting, repeating my name over and over again. The hallway stretched on, longer and longer, as though it was trying to trap me inside. The walls seemed to pulse, as if they had a heartbeat of their own. I reached for the nearest door and yanked it open, but it led me into another hallway. A copy of the first, but darker, more twisted. The walls were covered in old, yellowed papers, hospital records. I saw the names of patients scribbled across the front of each file, all of them crossed out. I reached for one and opened it, my hands shaking. The photo inside was of a woman, her eyes. They were wide open, almost bulging, her expression frozen in terror. And then I saw it. Underneath the photo was a name I recognized. Helen. I slammed the folder shut, dropping it to the ground. I was sure now. This wasn't just some twisted hospital, it was a prison. A place where those trapped souls were kept. And now I was one of them. I backed away from the paper, trying to get away from the image of Helen's terrified face. But I couldn't. I couldn't stop seeing her eyes, staring back at me from every corner of the room. The voice came again, but this time, it wasn't just one whisper. It was hundreds. Blake! Blake! I grabbed my head, trying to block out the sound, but it wasn't helping. The whispers were inside my mind now, like they were crawling into my thoughts, tearing at my sanity. They were everywhere, echoing from the walls, from the floors, from my own head. Suddenly the light flickered, once, twice, then it went out completely. The darkness returned, more suffocating than before, and I was left standing in the middle of a black void, with only the whispers to guide me. I reached for my phone, desperate for any source of light. The screen flickered to life, and for a moment, I thought I saw something at the end of the hallway. A shadow. It was tall, human-shaped, and it was watching me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The shadow moved, its figure elongating as it came closer. It wasn't walking, it was floating. Floating towards me. I took a step back, but the floor seemed to move with me, shifting like quicksand. No matter where I moved, the shadow followed. Blake, the voice whispered again. It was no longer coming from the walls, but from the shadow itself. You'll never escape. The shadow lunged, its form enveloping me, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then everything went dark. When I opened my eyes again, the darkness was gone. But something was wrong. I wasn't in the hallway anymore. The room one found myself in was cold, frigid, even. The walls were bare, stripped of any personality or decoration. It felt like a place meant to erase all sense of time, of identity. I sat up slowly, my head spinning. The cold floor beneath me was hard, unyielding. My legs ached as if I had been running for hours, but I couldn't remember how I'd gotten here. I glanced around, trying to make sense of my surroundings, but there was no sign of the shadow. No sign of anything, really. Just an empty room. The air was thick, dense, and heavy, like something was waiting to fall. The room felt alive, like it had a heartbeat. A slow, rhythmic pulse beneath the floor, vibrating up into my bones. I stood, shaky at first, my hands pressed against the walls. As I tried to steady myself, the silence was deafening and my mind was reeling. The last thing I remembered, I had seen the shadow, felt its cold touch. It had taken me, hadn't it? But where was I now? How had I gotten here? I stumbled to the door. It was old, rusted, and the handle felt like it hadn't been touched in years. I pulled, and to my surprise, it creaked open. The moment I stepped outside, I felt the change. The temperature dropped even further. It was like stepping into an abyss. The hallway stretched out before me, just like the ones I had seen earlier, but this one was different, darker. The lights flickered above, barely holding on, as if they, too, were afraid to shine too brightly in the suffocating darkness. I could hear the whispers again, this time in the distance. The same voices repeating my name in a haunting melody. Blake. It wasn't just one voice anymore. It was dozens, maybe hundreds, all of them coming from every corner of the hallway. My heart began to race. I had to move. I couldn't. Stay here. But as I took a step forward, I froze. There, at the end of the hallway, stood another figure. This time, it was not a shadow. It was a woman. Helen. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and empty. She stood motionless like a mannequin in a store display. But there was something deeply unsettling about her stillness. Her mouth was slightly open, as though she was about to speak, but no sound came. I felt a sudden chill crawl up my spine. It was the same feeling I had when I first saw her. The same warning. She lifted her hand slowly, pointing toward me. Her fingers twitched, as though they weren't entirely her own. The whispering voices grew louder, the pressure in the air mounting with every second. I could feel her eyes on me, or at least I thought I could. Blake. The voice came, but it wasn't Helen's. It was deeper, darker. It echoed from everywhere and nowhere at once. The voice felt like it was crawling under my skin, wrapping around my bones, binding me to this place. You cannot escape. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. The words ... they weren't just warnings. They were truths. I was trapped. Trapped in a place that wasn't real, and yet everything felt all too real. Helen's eyes seemed to widen even further, her mouth now opening impossibly wide, as if it could stretch beyond human limits. A low guttural sound came from her, and the darkness around me seemed to respond. It was like the walls were closing in, the air thickening, as though the entire hospital was breathing in time with her. I stumbled backward, my hand reaching out for something, anything to hold on to. The hallway twisted, and I couldn't tell if I was moving forward or if the walls were just shifting around me. Everything felt wrong. The whispers grew more frantic, their pace picking up, becoming a chorus of desperate, shrill voices. The sound was deafening. The words, "You cannot escape. You cannot escape ... repeated like a chant. I had to move. I had to get out. I turned, looking for another way, but the hallway stretched out before me, endless. There was no door, no exit. Just darkness, and the twisted figures of people who once lived in this place. And as I stood there, paralyzed, the chilling truth began to sink in. I had been part of this all along. I was never meant to escape. Suddenly, the whispers stopped. Dead silence. And then I heard it. The sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from behind me. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it. But then, the air shifted again. The temperature dropped even further, and I could see my breath fogging in front of me. The footsteps came closer. They weren't mine. They weren't anyone's. They were something else. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, trying to understand what was happening, but my mind felt foggy. My vision blurred. The shadows moved, and they were closing in. There was no escape. No way out. I was already gone. I didn't know how much time had passed, or if time even mattered anymore. I was floating in a state of pure confusion. The air was so thick now, I could barely breathe, each inhale feeling like I was sucking in glass. Every part of my body screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. They were frozen in place, as if the very ground beneath me was holding me here, keeping me trapped in this nightmare. The footsteps stopped, but the silence that followed was even worse. It felt like the entire hospital had fallen silent, waiting for something to happen. I looked around, my heart hammering in my chest, my mind racing. Then I saw it again. The shadow. It was at the end of the hallway. The same tall, dark figure that had haunted me before. But now it wasn't just a shadow. It was more solid, its form now an unmistakable presence. And it was moving toward me. My throat went dry. I couldn't move. The figure glided toward me. Its movements fluid and unnatural. It wasn't walking. It was floating, like it wasn't bound by the laws of the world. As it drew closer, I could see its face, or what was left of it. It was hollow, empty. Its eyes were nothing more than deep black voids, sucking in everything around them. I could feel the pull of those eyes, as if they were drawing me in, making it harder to resist. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But no sound escaped my throat. I was paralyzed. The figure reached out, its hand a claw, its fingers long and twisted. It was close now, too close. I could feel its cold breath on my skin. And then it spoke. "Blake, you thought you could escape?" The voice was raspy, as though it hadn't spoken in centuries. It echoed inside my skull. "This place is your prison. You will never leave." I shut my eyes, hoping to shut out the nightmare, but when I opened them again, the shadow was gone. The hallway was empty, silent. I didn't know whether to be relieved or terrified. The oppressive weight of the air hadn't lifted, though. It still pressed down on me, thick and heavy, like a constant reminder that I was trapped. No escape, no way out. I turned back down the hallway, desperate to find something, anything that could help me. The whispers started again, distant at first, but growing louder with every step I took. They weren't just voices anymore. They were screams. Desperate cries for help, all coming from the walls, from the floor, from every inch of this godforsaken place. I could hear the sound of footsteps again, but these weren't the same slow, deliberate steps I had heard before. These were frantic, wild, as though someone or something was running, trying to get away. I turned around quickly, but there was no one there. I felt it then, the presence. It wasn't alone anymore. I wasn't the only one in the hall. The air around me seemed to thicken, pressing against my chest with each breath I took. I felt as though I was suffocating, but I couldn't stop moving. I had to find a way out. The whispers were louder now, echoing off the walls, the floor, and even the ceiling. They were all around me, suffocating me. Then I heard something else. A loud crash from somewhere deep within the hospital, followed by the unmistakable sound of something or someone scraping against the walls. The noise was guttural, like nails on a chalkboard, making my skin crawl. I couldn't ignore it. The noise was calling to me, pulling me toward it, urging me to follow. I tried to fight it, but I couldn't. My feet carried me forward, down a new hallway, one I hadn't seen before. The walls here were covered in cracks, the floors uneven. Everything about this hallway felt different, older. But the whispers were louder here. The voices were sharper, more insistent, like they were right next to my ear. Then I saw it. A door dot. It was barely noticeable at first, hidden in the shadows at the end of the hall. But it was there, and it was calling to me. I reached for the door, my hand shaking as I grasped the cold handle. I could feel the pulse of the hospital's heartbeat beneath the floor, the vibrations running through me. I opened the door slowly, the creaking sound making my skin crawl. Inside was a room like none I had seen before. It was small, cramped, and the walls were covered in blood-stained bandages, 4 bags, and old medical equipment. There were rusted tools on the counter. And there, in the corner, was a figure. A woman. Helen. She was sitting, her back against the wall, staring at nothing. Her eyes were wide, but there was no recognition in them. No life. I stepped forward, my heart pounding in my chest. "Helen?" I whispered, but she didn't respond. I reached out to touch her arm, but as my fingers brushed against her skin, she snapped her head to the side, her eyes locking onto mine. They weren't the eyes I had seen before. They were empty, hollow. And then she spoke. "You're not supposed to be here." I recoiled, my breath catching in my throat. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Helen stood up, slowly, her body jerking unnaturally, like she was a marionette being controlled by invisible strings. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. Then, a low, guttural laugh escaped her lips. It wasn't her voice. I was the first. The voice said, but it wasn't Helen's. It was something darker, something deeper. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the door slammed shut behind me. I whirled around, but the door wouldn't budge. Panic surged through me. The shadows in the room seemed to move, shifting and changing, forming new shapes and faces. The whispers grew louder, and the laughter continued, echoing off the walls, coming from every corner. Helen, or whatever it was that had taken her form, stepped closer to me, her movements jerky and unnatural. The darkness in her eyes was overwhelming, pulling me in, drowning me. "You can't leave," she said, the words dripping with malice. "You were never meant to leave." I took a step back, my hands trembling. I had to get out of here. I had to escape. But as I looked around the room, I realized the walls were closing in. Slowly at first, but then faster, the space shrinking, the darkness swallowing everything. I was trapped. I could feel the suffocating pressure on my chest, my heartbeat quickening with every passing second. The laughter was getting louder, sharper. And then I heard the voice again. "You'll never leave. This is your end." Suddenly, the walls stopped moving. The room was still, deadly still. And then, everything went black. I gasped, my eyes snapping open. But the darkness around me felt even thicker this time, suffocating. I couldn't see, couldn't move. It was like being buried alive, the air so heavy, I could barely breathe. Panic clawed at my chest, and my heart thudded painfully in my ribs. The laughter was gone. The whispers had faded. But in its place, there was something far worse. A silence that felt like it was alive, pressing in on me from all sides. I tried to call out, but my voice was trapped in my throat. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cold, rough surface of the floor beneath me. The sensation was almost too real, too solid, but it did nothing to reassure me. I was in some kind of void, an in-between place where nothing made sense. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I wasn't alone. Suddenly the darkness began to shift. It wasn't just empty. Something was moving within it, writhing, like 1,000 unseen eyes watching me from the blackness. I tried to push myself up, but it was like the ground was pulling. me back down as if something below me was holding me in place. Then I heard it, a low, dragging sound like something scraping along the floor. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew louder, closer, until I felt the vibrations beneath me. Something was coming. I tensed, straining to listen, but the sound didn't stop. It was slow, deliberate. Whatever it was getting closer. The air thickened again, pressing down on me, and my heart raced. I had to move. I had to get up. Finally, my hand found purchase, and I pushed myself up to my knees. My eyes still couldn't adjust to the complete darkness, but I knew I wasn't alone anymore. The dragging sound stopped, and then, silence. But then, I heard a whisper again. This time, it wasn't from the walls. It was right next to me, Blake. The voice was soft, almost tender. It was Helen's voice, but distorted, twisted, like something trying to mimic her. "You're not supposed to be here." The coldness in her tone sent a shiver down my spine. I froze, my skin prickling with fear. I couldn't see her, but I could feel her presence. It was closer now, and I knew something was watching me from the shadows. The whispers, the chilling presence, it was all real. Then, without warning, I heard a loud thud behind me. My head snapped around, and before I could react, something cold and sharp grabbed me by the arm, pulling me backward. I gasped as the grip tightened, but I couldn't break free. My muscles screamed in protest, but it was like I was being dragged into a void, pulled deeper into the unknown. The shadows enveloped me. I don't know how long I was dragged for. It could have been seconds, minutes, or hours. Time had lost all meaning. But when the motion finally stopped, I found myself in a new place. A place that felt older, colder. I was standing now, though my legs were shaking. The pressure on my arm was gone, but I still felt like I was being watched. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, a chill running down my spine. I took in my surroundings. The room was vast but dimly lit and covered in decay. Rotting hospital. Beds lined the walls, their sheets stained with dark, old blood. The air was thick with the smell of something far worse than just the decay, something foul, like the breath of death itself. I could see the faint outline of figures in the shadows. Faces, no, bodies silently watching me, unmoving, lifeless. But there was something different about them. They weren't like Helen. They weren't like the figures I had seen before. These were real, or they had been, once. The floor beneath me creaked, and I jumped, my heart skipping a beat. The air seemed to tremble, and then the whispers started again. But they were different this time. It wasn't a chant anymore. It wasn't just my name. It was pleading. The voices were desperate, begging, crying out in terror, warning me. "Don't. Go." One voice whimpered. "Get out of here." Another voice sobbed. "Run, Blake, run." I turned, but the shadows around me only deepened. The figures weren't moving. They were still, silent, their eyes empty and hollow, stared at me with a strange, twisted intensity. But something was wrong. They were staring at me, yes, but not like before. This time, their eyes were focused on me in a way that made my skin crawl, and I realized they weren't staring in curiosity. They were waiting for something, for me. I backed away slowly, every step pulling me deeper into the room, deeper into the nightmare. The floorboards groaned under my weight, and I swore I felt something cold brush against my skin as I moved. Suddenly, I heard a door slam open, the force of it rattling through the room. A faint light appeared from behind the doorframe. I turned instinctively, my body reacting before my mind could catch up. And there, standing in the doorway, was the last person I expected to see. Helen. But she wasn't the woman I remembered. She was twisted now, her face distorted, her eyes empty sockets of darkness. She was no longer the one who had helped me. She was the one who had led me here. "Blake," she whispered, her voice broken, unrecognizable. "You're too late." Before I could respond, the room seemed to shudder. The shadows seemed to come alive, moving toward me. I was no longer in control. I was trapped. The world around me seemed to fracture. The room, the shadows, the figures, everything began to pulse and sway, as if reality itself was unraveling. I could hear the whispers now, a deafening chorus of voices crying out, their words merging into one single, terrifying truth. There was no escape. Helen stepped forward, her body jerking in ways that should have been impossible, and yet, she moved. Her eyes, those deep, hollow eyes, never left mine. You were never meant to leave this place. Blake, she said softly, almost lovingly, this is your fate. Her words were like chains, binding me to this nightmare. The temperature in the room dropped sharply, and I felt a coldness seep into my bones. But even in the freezing darkness, there was a part of me that refused to give up. There had to be a way out. There had to be. I looked around desperately. The shadows were closing in, the walls were creeping toward me, but I knew I couldn't give in. Not yet. In a surge of adrenaline, I bolted toward the door, my legs trembling beneath me. I didn't stop to think. I just ran. I had no idea where I was going, but I couldn't stay here. As I passed the threshold, I heard a final whisper in my ear. Run, Blake, run. And then I felt it. The pressure in my chest lifted. The air cleared. The darkness, the shadows, they were gone. I didn't know how I escaped. I didn't know how I survived. But I did. The hospital was no longer a prison. It was just a building. A place that had held me captive, but I had broken free. I took a deep breath, and for the first time since I arrived, I felt alive again. I was free. And as I walked away, I couldn't help but think of those voices. The whispers, the cries, the pleading. I had survived. But what about the others? Would they ever escape? I couldn't say for sure. But one thing I knew sometimes. The worst prisons aren't made of walls and bars. They're made of memories. And they never let you go.